Hello and welcome to Taxed and Wasted by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. I'm Emilio Garcia, and today we're going to start with a topic that I'm sure will infuriate any taxpayer who's having a bit of a hard time or is just seeing the economic situation in our country and feeling frustrated by it, as I think most of us are. Obviously, taxes in Australia are far too high. Obviously, at the moment, people are making significantly less than they were before. There are people who are unemployed. We are suffering the greatest job loss in a century in this country. But that didn't stop the government of two states from starting to put out really high-paying job propositions, ads for people to fill. And you would be surprised what these jobs are. So let's start with New South Wales. So the Department of Education in New South Wales has put out a listing for a job that pays $327,000 a year. Now you're thinking to yourself, well, this must be a very important job. Maybe it's crucial that it be filled, and it's gonna give our children and the educational system in our state a really big boost. What this job is actually is the Director of Culture the Director of People and Culture at the New South Wales Department of Education. So $327,000 of taxpayers' money for a job that includes something to do with people and culture, which is like the most non-specific job title that you could ever give, but we can just assume that it's some woke, ridiculous BS. But it doesn't stop there. I think you think that's bad. Let's go over to the socialist state of Victoria, where a job for $249,000 was listed. And so $249,000 a year to be the Director of Intersectionality and Inclusion at the Department of Justice. So $250,000 every single year to make sure that the Department of Justice has proper inclusivity and is meeting certain intersectional identity groups, because you really can't have justice served unless you have Latinx, crippled, pagan something on your books. So obviously, I mean, we're joking, but this is pretty infuriating. We're seeing really harsh economic times out there. People have lost their businesses, people have lost their jobs, people are struggling to get by. In Victoria, 1/3 of small businesses will never reopen, and these are the jobs that the government is filling out. So we already have a problem with bureaucrat pay to begin with in Australia. Our bureaucrats are among the best paid anywhere in the world. And you could imagine a world in which you have a small number of very qualified bureaucrats who do an important job and get paid adequately. You really can't attract the best talent without paying them well. But in Australia, we have a part of that just without the competency, which means we have huge amounts of very average, non-impressive, professionally people working at the government with really cushy jobs that it's almost impossible to get fired from, and they're really not granting that much of a benefit to society. So this is obviously something that should be reformed. The size of government should be reduced dramatically. Jobs such as Director of Intersectionality and Inclusion and Director of People and Culture for Education, those are jobs that obviously should have never been invented. In fact, they don't actually exist. They're just a figment of our imagination, an expensive one. And so obviously I think that this is something that should be done away with, and I think that the broader ATA and the broader public of Australia would agree with. We're going to move on now to alcohol. And I'm sure, as you know, if you've been anywhere outside of Australia to have a drink ever in your life, you'll know that we're paying some of the highest alcohol taxes anywhere in the world. Australia has huge alcohol taxes on spirits, on beers, on wines, and that obviously raises the price artificially pretty severely. Now, we saw recently, for the first time in a long time, the government put off an increase to alcohol excise, which hadn't happened in a very long time. But what we are seeing is that the government is holding firm to the fact that they do not want to reduce alcohol excise taxes. That's just not something that they're interested in. They don't think that it's going to be beneficial. They might fear that more people will drink. However, we do have new data out of PricewaterhouseCoopers that says that actually a better course of action would be to reduce alcohol excise taxes, the thing that the government doesn't want to do, because it could actually do two very good things. One is that it could help the sector recover faster, meaning companies that produce spirits, companies that produce beer or wine, they would see a far faster recovery. And on top of that, the government would see a really large boost in revenue from alcohol by reducing those taxes. So there really is very little reason, it would seem, if we are to believe the study carried out by PricewaterhouseCoopers, which we really have no reason to doubt. And also, even if this data hadn't been released, really the justification behind the alcohol excise tax is pretty vapid and stupid, and the price we're paying for a pint in this country is really egregious. So hopefully the government will look at this data, see that there is some good in reducing alcohol excise. We can see some more jobs be created. We can see some cheaper drinks at the pub, and we would all be better off for it. We're going to go now quickly to a video produced by our policy director, Emily Dye, and she's going to explain to us exactly how we're getting tobacco excise wrong and what the government should be doing about it.
In the last couple of years, we've had a real uptake in the illicit tobacco trade. And as a result, I think, of the high excise tax, the excise tax goes up regularly. And as a result, there's a lot of profit to be made. When cigarettes are $33 for a pack in Australia, but only $2 in Indonesia, we have a problem. We all know that smoking is very addictive. Nicotine is one of the most addictive substances. About 20 to 25% of users actually become addicted and dependent and use cigarettes daily. And so they're not going to quit just because the price is too high. At some point, it just means that they cut down on other things. They have a lower quality of life, lower living standards, because they're spending so much on cigarettes. They really need an alternative to cigarettes and a way of weaning themselves off that isn't just punishing them. We are now spending taxpayer dollars on the tobacco task force with the border force, and that is costing us money, and that is a threat to society, I think, because right now it's low risk. If you sell tobacco, you could get fined. You're not going to go to jail for years and years. A lot of drug dealers are like, hey, I can make a lot of money on tobacco. It's not as risky, not as bad, and so it's not as dangerous. And a lot of that danger that comes with the drug trade is because of the risk. They're risking a lot to trade, and there's a lot to lose. And so they have to protect their products. Right now we don't have that with tobacco, and so it's a lot safer of an illegal market relative to these drugs. I think that if anybody has a nicotine addiction, it's the ATO. They collect a lot of money on the excise tax. They need to cut spending, and they need to cut spending on things like the tobacco task force. We don't need to be, if we don't create an illegal trade, we don't have to spend money to stop an illegal trade.
All right, that was fantastic content from Emily Dye, as per usual. Nothing less than what we have become accustomed to from her. We're going to finish off with Victoria. And the situation down there seems to be devolving quite quickly. We went over a couple of episodes ago how Daniel Andrews' really severe approach to the pandemic doesn't seem to be in lockstep with the reality on the ground, and how the cases in Victoria, though they're much higher than they are anywhere in the country, don't seem to justify a full-on lockdown, as the healthcare system in Victoria is not in risk, really, of being overwhelmed yet, and it's not even close to being at risk. But Daniel Andrews seems to be on a bit of a power trip at the moment, and recently he tried to extend Victoria's state of emergency indefinitely, and that didn't materialize. He didn't get that across the line. And so now Dan Andrews' new idea is to have an 18-month state of emergency, which is patently absurd. This is, I mean, it seems more than anything like a power grab. I suppose the way that they would put it is to say that the situation with COVID is just so severe in Victoria that they really need to plan to really control the population and control movement to assure basically that people don't die needlessly at a large scale. But it's not okay for the Premier to really lock down the state and to take away people's liberties and to shut down businesses for so long for what, we repeat, is really not the situation that they seem to say that it is. It is not. It's a bad situation. The Labour government down there has completely mismanaged the situation regarding COVID in Victoria, and they are in a complete. How do you say it? I mean, just compared to the rest of the world, to the rest of the country, where we see cases of anywhere between 4 and 20 every day, and they're somewhere between 100 and 200. Of course, they've done things badly, but shutting down businesses, not allowing people to move freely to this degree is obviously something that is not warranted and should end rather soon. And speaking of ending, that's where we are going to close off this episode of Taxed and Wasted. Thank you very much for joining us. If you haven't done this already, please go on YouTube and on Facebook and follow us there so you can see the video version of the podcast. If you want the audio version of the podcast, you can go on Stitcher, iTunes, Spotify, really wherever you get your podcasts. We're there. Subscribe. If you haven't become a member of the ATA, Australian Taxpayers Alliance, please do. You can go to taxpayers.org.au and become a member. You get lots of great benefits. This has been Taxed and Wasted by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. We'll see you next week.